This right, you got that wrong,
Cease and desist.
The cease and desist order could be, yeah.
Right as we get started, that would be very natural.
Hi, neighbors.
All right, let me just pull up my intro stuff. I'm saving paper by using my phone. You're good. Don't have to print the intros every time. Well, good evening and welcome to Roundabout Books. I'm Julie, the events manager. So real quick, before we get started, we want to take this opportunity to acknowledge that our bookstore resides on the ancestral unceded land of the Confederate Tribes of Warm Springs. In our immediate area are also the unceded lands of the Confederate Tribes of Siletz Indians and the Tribes of Grand Ronde. We encourage everyone to learn more about the land you occupy and the story of its peoples. If you're interested in any of those books tonight, our local section that's right behind you has some great options, or if there's a book you've heard about, please ask us to look it up. We'd be happy to order it. And then a quick reminder about some other upcoming events. Next Thursday, local photographer David Young Wolf and his co-author Kathy Hooker will present their pictorial essay collection, Navajo Mothers and Daughters, Portraits of Beauty. Copies are on sale on top of our local section in our events section. And then Tuesday the 27th, Virginia Hartman will join us in the store to discuss her book, The Marsh Queen, a debut novel with comparisons to Where the Crawdads Sing. That's kind of a big comparison. And on Thursday the 29th, we'll be live streaming with Ashley Winstead for her mystery, The Last Housewife, a dark thriller about a woman determined to take down a patriarchal cult. So she's going to live stream in from her house in Houston, but we'll be streaming it here in the store. Be sure to visit roundaboutbookshop.com for more information about our events and book clubs. This event is being recorded for our YouTube channel, where you can find recordings of our events back to May 2020. A bonus side effect of the pandemic is our events live in perpetuity. So let's talk about the reason we are all here, Backscatter by Tom Wangler. So the year is 1999. Can we all remember back to that? The much anticipated Y2K is but 3 short months away. Hidden among the many events of the year was a little known incident which happened in the high desert area of eastern Oregon during a 4-day period. Something inexplicable was systematically and indiscriminately killing wildlife, livestock, and human beings without provocation, without exception, and without mercy. Their grotesque deaths trigger a frantic search by a diverse and separate number of individuals to find answers before more die. As the mystery unfolds, 2 investigators manage to slowly fit the pieces of the puzzle together, only to find themselves the target of a maniacal plot to stop and silence them. Some secrets are worth killing for. So a little bit about our 2 speakers tonight. Author Tom Wangler was born and raised in the high desert of Central Oregon, a graduate at Oregon College of Education with a bachelor's degree in physical education, health sciences, and journalism. Tom embarked on a teaching career, which eventually landed him a 2-year stint in Africa with the Peace Corps, which has some to do with his previous book, Nigeria, which we have copies in if you want tonight. After returning stateside, he obtained a master's degree from Oregon State University before working for a utility company, an aircraft company, commercially flying helicopters, and teaching at a residential school. Tom lives with his wife Cheryl and their 2 German Shepherds in Bend, Oregon. And then also joining us is Kim Cooper Findling, who is the publisher of Dancing Moon Press and an author, editor, journalist, and teacher based in Bend, Oregon. She's a 5th-generation Oregonian and an award-winning writer of stories about her beloved home state. Several of her books are over in our local section right now, including some very fun day trip books for traveling. And she is also now what's the job with the coast?
Creative director for the Oregon Coast Visitors Association.
Yes, creative director for the Oregon Coast Visitors Association. That's like a dream job. So we're going to have a little conversation, they're going to have a little conversation, and we'll do a Q&A, and then after the event we'll have books available for purchase and for signing. And if you have any questions about any of our other events or other books, please let us know. So welcome, Tom and Kim. I'm going to have you guys have this, but if you don't want to use it, you're fine. Just, project. If anybody has any trouble or hearing, let me know, and we'll have the microphone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Last time I had a microphone in my hand, it was at a karaoke. And I got laughed at, so I'm going to leave it right there. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, Julie, for having us. So I had many questions. A lot of people have asked me, what inspired you to write this story? how did it come about? And it was actually the culmination of a lot of adventures, experiences in my life, from flying helicopters to living in Central Oregon, to working at one of the facilities that's mentioned in the book. In the book, it's called COTEF, Central Oregon Training and Evaluation Facility. It's out on Dodds Road, on the way to Milliken and Burns. It was turned over to the Oregon National Guard many years ago, and the National Guard turned it into a school, a co-ed school, built on a military model for at-risk teenagers. And I had the golden opportunity to work there for 8 years as a teacher. And I also had the golden opportunity to look at plans of the building, what it was originally developed for, and some other things. So between that and our helicopter business and everything else that was going on in Central Oregon at the time, was kind of like the basis for the story. Then I read an interesting article on Google about a laser that was being developed for the Air Force. And they were having one of the issues that they were facing was they could develop a strong enough laser to knock down an airplane or a missile, but they weren't quite sure yet that they hadn't developed a system to target it, acquire and target the offender at a long distance. Then I thought of the backscatter site, back east, out east, which is just east of northeast of Christmas Valley. I thought, well, that radar site had the capability to identify and track aircraft and missiles at extreme distances. Its range of operation went from the Baltic Sea out over Midway Island, clear down to the Easter Islands and back. So I'm saying, wow, if they could marry that up with a laser, we would be home free. And, but as things go, I thought, oh, this is just too clean. Something's got to go wrong. So that was the basis for the story. I had brought in a lot of different characters in the story, and all of the characters that were used in the story were inspired by a various number of people that I knew. The pilots that I flew with, the people I flew with in the Civil Air Patrol, people I worked with at the Oregon Youth Challenge Program, people I knew out at the airport, people I've met along the way, the villains. So with that, I would entertain any questions anybody has.
That was my last question. Where are the villains coming from?
Needs an evil doer.
Yeah, where are the villains coming from? Lieutenant Colonel T.J. Rutledge, who is the project manager for the BACKSKATTER, the Oregon project, was not a very nice person. I don't know if you got a chance to read that far into the book. Not a very nice person, and he was designed that way. And the inspiration for him was was a guy that I worked for at one time. And this guy was the worst boss I ever worked for. Some people you work for and other people you work with, especially it's the case in the military. This guy you work for, and he was, you never knew what was going to happen with this guy because he changed the rules almost on a daily basis. And the rules were always changed to benefit him. And my last performance review with this guy, he was talking to me about my attitude and how he thought that it had slipped a little bit in the last year or so. And if there was anything that he could do to help me improve that. And I says, oh, absolutely, yeah, you can help me with my attitude. He said, well, what can I do? And I says, you can resign. And he his face just went blank. He just looked at me like, I can't believe this guy just said that, you know. And then the next words out of his mouth, I'll always remember. He says, I think this review is over. Thank you, Tom. You know. And he eventually got transferred to Siberia or someplace like that. You know. He got his just due. But that was the inspiration for T.J. Rutledge. Yeah, T.J. Rutledge got his just due as well in the story.
Tom, I was wondering how accessible was the information when you were doing your research on the technology? What actually happened there? Was it easy to find? And you know, if so, did you spend a lot of time digging into that? Or
the research. A lot of research. I can't believe how much. I probably had done more research on this book than I ever did for a term paper in college. Yeah, and some of it wasn't easy to find. Especially the background information on Central Oregon Training and Evaluations Facility, COTEF, which is now the Oregon Youth Challenge Program. That I had to dig through some of the archives while I was working there, and some of the people were kind of nervous about giving me that information.
They didn't want to appear in the book. So what was the origin of that facility?
The Redmond facility was the one that was built first, and it was Central Oregon Unit Evaluation, something or other. It was built specifically to test the Army's new generation of night vision goggles. That's what it was publicized for. And at the time it was built, I was working for Pacific Power and Light here in Bend as a tech rep. I worked with all the industrial and commercial customers that the company had in Central Oregon. And our engineer asked me, he says, is the night vision facility one of your customers? I said, yeah, I guess it is. I've never been there. He says, you want to go see it? He says, sure. And he said, you know it's a classified military installation? And I said, okay, what does that mean? He says, I need to take a photocopy of your driver's license and send it to him, because before we can go to the facility, they're going to do a quick background check on you and I. And I'm like, this could be trouble. Anyway, so I said, okay. So we did that. We got the clearance to go visit the site, and ostensibly the reason that we went there with the engineer was because they had their own generation, but they had a transfer switch between their system and ours, so they could go back and forth. And we needed to see if their system was compatible with our system. That's why we're there. And the facility in Bend is identical to the one in Redmond. You turn off Highway 20 out there in BLM land, and you go down this long driveway. About halfway down the driveway, they have this arm down, this guard shack. Two guys are standing out there. One had a sidearm, the other one had an M16 up their hand. And we showed him our credential and told him our reason for being there, and he got on the horn and said, okay, someone will be right here to escort you into the property. So this is a first for me. I'm saying this is really something. So pretty soon the guy came in a car and he said, follow me. So we followed him to the parking lot. And we got out of the cars, and he says, before we go inside, he says, there are a couple of rules. He says, number one, you are not to ask any questions other than what you came here to see about the electrical interface. He says there will be no tours of the property except for the generation room. And that was pretty much it. And we would ask that, he says, and we would ask that what you see here and do, that you keep it to yourself. We're saying, all this for night vision goggles, you know? Well, okay. So he took us into this room it was a huge room, and they had 3 massive generators in there. Each one was 500 kW, which is power. And each generator had 2 fuel tanks. And he says we test the fuel tanks almost on a daily basis, make sure that the fuel is clean and used. And so Cornell was the engineer's name, so they escorted us off and we drove back. Their equipment worked well with ours. And Cornell was saying, he says, I don't know what they're doing there, but they're not testing night vision goggles. and so there was always a lot of speculation about that facility in Redmond. And then when the one was built out on Dodge Road, the sister facility, there was a lot of speculation about that. Someone at Youth Challenge that was former military knew a little history about, in fact, he considered himself a so-called expert on the facility. And I was talking to him before he left and went to work for the Sheriff's Department. And I said, what do you know about this facility and the one in Redmond? He says, did you ever look at them on a map? I said, no. He says, they line up in a perfect north-south axis. He says, just like the backscatter site out in Christmas Valley and the backscatter site in, a lot of people didn't notice, down in Tule Lake, California, they line up on the north-south axis. Because one is the receiving site and one is the sending site. Signal goes out, one comes back on the other. And he says that's what's going on between Redmond and Bend. One signal is going out from Redmond, it's either going out from Redmond and coming to Bend, or it's going out from Bend and coming back to Redmond. So the logical question is were they signaling? He kind of rolled his eyes and he says, well, you know, if you sit and think about it, he says, where are all those antennas and radar or satellite dishes pointed? And I said, to the sky. And he says, don't you think they're talking to satellites? And he says, yeah, I suppose that they are. But what satellites are they talking to? And he says, there's the story. He says, there's the story.
What is I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt too much, but I'm curious, when was it built and when was it decommissioned? What was the period of operation?
That's another great question because all 3 sites were Redmond site was built first. I don't remember the exact year without looking it up. It was built first, and within 6 months of the completion they actually started building the Bend site while they were finishing up the completion of the Redmond site. And also during the same time period, they were building the radar facility out in Christmas Valley. All 3 sites were built within a 3-year period at a cost of about $500 million. And they were all in operation for only 3 years. And then they closed them, they put them all into warm storage and moved the equipment out of there. So everybody's wondering why.
So what period were they in operation?
It was in the 80s, if I remember right. Yeah, it was in the 80s.
And what's the status of the backscatter site now? Is there anything there?
No, all of the pads are still there for the 3 radar arrays. Some of the buildings are there. Part of the security fencing is there. All that stuff has been removed piecemeal over the last 20 years. The last I heard was the backscatter site was being considered for a solar farm. Yeah. We used to fly, when I was doing search and rescue missions for the Civil Air Patrol, we used to fly out there all the time. And you could always tell when they turned the system on because all your instruments went haywire. It was kind of cool. And we knew that we shouldn't get too close to it because memory recalls, it was kind of like restricted airspace around the radar site. So, but it was massive. It was absolutely massive. So, I tried to do the description of it justice in the story, but you almost have to see it to believe it. It was just a massive site. There are pictures of it on the internet, so you can get a look at it, see what it looked like in its heyday. It was a giant rector set out there in the middle of the desert. The other question I got, and Kim brought this up, was the name change of our local hospital, because it played a pretty prominent role in solving the mystery. A lot of it was centered around the hospital. And when I first contacted St. Charles and wanted to use their name, they said, can you send us a synopsis of the story and the part that the hospital plays at? Sure. That was a reasonable request, so I sent it to them. Didn't hear from them. Got back to him, reached back out to him, and said, what do you think? You know, is this doable? Can I use the name? And the lady that was my contact at St. Charles says, well, we have passed your request on to our lawyers, which is never a good sign. And I said, okay. I said, this was about 6 months before publication. And didn't hear. So I got back to her, and she says, yes, they're busy. I think we're getting close to the end. And then a couple of weeks later, she emailed me a consent and permission form. Legal. It was all legal jargon and stuff like this. It had signatures down, placed down at the bottom to sign. You know. So I signed my name, you know, and sent it back to him. Didn't hear anything. We're getting closer and closer to publication, so I'm starting to sweat bullets. And so I'm talking almost every other day with this lady. She says, takes time, the lawyer's doing this. And I says, and I finally got back to her and I says, I was under the impression that this was a done deal. The only thing that was left to do was to have an officer of St. Charles sign off on this form, give it back to me so I could put it in the file, and then we could use your name. Never heard from her again. And that's when Kim suggested, she says, we're getting real close now. She says, Kim, try again, or Tom, try again. She says, using the name of St. Charles would lend a lot of weight and a lot of credibility to the story because it's historical fiction. And I says, I agree. I tried one last time, she never got back to me. And that's when I changed it to the Central Oregon Regional Medical Center. St. Charles probably would have carried a lot of weight with Central Oregon, but in terms of the world reading public, couldn't care less. You know.
They should probably change the name to St.
Yeah. Well, I always thought, and I talked to one of my beta readers, and I said, "What do you think?" And this is Lieutenant Colonel Pat Carpenter of the Air National Guard, formerly of the Air Force and formerly of Alaska Airlines. And he says, I like Central Oregon Regional Medical Center. He says, it sounds really big. It sounds really impressive. He says, St. Charles. He has no basis for understanding what it was like. So I said, okay. So I know it was a disappointment to you, probably a disappointment to some other people, but.
Yeah, you tried.
Well, I tried, yeah. I tried. And we had changed some other names too. Those of us that have been in Bend for a long time remember the Air Life helicopter that used to fly overhead all the time and make all the noise. And I contacted their parent company, which was Air Methods out of Denver, Colorado. Tried to call them, sent them a couple emails, never got back to me, never responded. So I changed Air Life to Life Air. And let's see, what else did I have to change? I think that was it. There was nobody that I could contact at the Pilot Butte Drive-In because it was closed down and out of business at that point. You know, so I could use the Pilot Butte
It
Drive-In.
really was historical.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't wait to read this.
It was a fun story to write. It was a fun story to write. Kim and Todd kept me on track, just like they did with Nigeria. I had no clue about the publication business. They says, well, you got to get an agent. You got to do this. You got to do that, so on and so forth. And so I read an article about Kim acquiring Dancing Moon Press. I said, well, she's local. I'll just reach out to her. And the rest is history. She just walked me through the process. So it's my hope that one of these days that Dancing Moon Press will be right up there with the Penguin and everybody else. And I'll have a bigger distribution. So.
Well, actually, I have a question about that since we have a publisher and an author here, just about the kind of state of small publishing now, and for projects like Tom's and other people, you know, writing books, but kind of more at a local level who maybe aren't reaching for a national publisher. I mean, how are things right now?
Yeah,
in terms
I
of the
mean,
industry?
it's been I started writing professionally in 2000s, Y2K, which features in this book, prominently, you know, and things have changed in the business quite a lot since then, but they've only gotten more competitive, in my opinion, in terms of actually breaking into the national market, which is really, really challenging and daunting. Dancing Moon Press was actually founded by a woman named Carla Perry who lives in Newport, and she ran it for 23 years, I think, and then she was ready to retire, and she asked me if I would like to take the business on. And her model, she was sort of formed out of that space of how competitive and challenging it is to actually get a book published through New York. You know, typically you do need to find an agent, and the agent pitches to the big publishers, and even that is, it's really hard to get an agent, and it's really hard for the agent to sell the book to New York in a lot of cases. So, as an alternative, Carla found people coming to her and just saying, hey, you know, I don't want to do that, or I tried that and it didn't work, or I tried it for 2 years and that's all I wanted to put into it. You know, what are my other options? And at that point, self-publishing was still, you know, it was, today it's a lot easier. You could run things through Amazon pretty easily. Technology's come a long way, but back then that wasn't necessarily the case. So she created this business that's independent publishing, meaning that the author has a whole lot more say in the matter. You know, it's more collaborative. I mean, Tom and Todd, my husband, and I worked with Tom on his cover design, even what the typesetting looks like, and et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, people come to us for a variety of reasons. It's sort of the same as what I was just saying with Carl. You know, either they've tried the New York plan and it didn't work out for them, or they never wanted to try that in the first place because it's such a rodeo. Lots of our authors are retired and finally had the time that they'd always wanted to write a novel or a book or a memoir, and their audience, their intended audience is friends and family. They're not really looking to get out there into the big market. You know, sort of passion projects type stuff. People who really want more control in their book publishing process too. I have 8 books. Some of them are traditionally published through New York. Some of them are more like small independent press published, and then more recently some are published through Dancing Moon, since I bought a book publishing company. So that's, you know, I kind of have that perspective of all the different ways that it can go down, you know. And I think I always encourage people that if their dream is to be published with Penguin or with a big book publishing company to try, you know, I mean, it's a process to learn, but if you have the time and energy and that's what you wanna do, then that's what I think people should do. You know, some people just really aren't interested in doing that, so this is an alternative, but also with support, you know, like you can self-publish on Amazon now. They have templates and whatnot, you can run your book through. But it can be complicated and there's limited options in terms of how it will look when you're done, you know, so we're kind of a middle ground option that's, I mean, we're still small, we're here in Bend, we work primarily with Oregon authors, so we're not like as expensive as some other people out there that do this kind of work, you know. But, you know, still you get lots of conversations on one time about how you want this to look and support about getting it onto the print on demand sites, you know, the title set up, et cetera, which some people just don't wanna learn themselves.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of it.
An interesting process from the start to finish. Kim and Todd walked me through every step of the way, and when I try to explain to people, you know, what the process involves, they just says, "Oh, it's way too much work." And I says, "Well, that's why a lot of people do it, I guess."
Yeah, yeah. And how long did from start to finish did Backscatter take?
I started writing Backscatter in April of 2000, and we went to publication in June of 2022. It's about a 26-month process. I was working at the time too, you know, so I just pick away at it on weekends, and then when I retired for the second time, then I could devote full time to it in between house chores and things like that.
Yeah, you were building a house too.
Yeah, we were building a house too.
Yeah.
So, the writing didn't take all that long. It was the research and doing the checking and double checking and so on and so forth. Because one of my readers says, he says, I'm going to be fact checking everything that's in that book, just because he had some familiarity with what was going on. He says, I'm going to be fact checking everything in that book. And I know that anybody that has any kind of familiarity with helicopters, because we now have a helicopter school at Bend Airport, they'll probably be fact checking everything about helicopters. And one of the things that a couple of my readers said was, did you have to go into so much detail about helicopters? And I said, yeah, I got a little carried away on some things, but you know, there were a lot of things that I backed off on the helicopters. But, Kelly Swab, who was the editor, she lives over in Springfield, one of her comments was, she says, I had no idea that a thing like density altitude even existed, you know, and the factor that it plays in flying, you know, or weight and balance and some of that stuff. She says, that was really interesting. And she says, what was the other thing she says? She says, so, I learned something new. Laser actually stands for light amplification by accelerated radiation. And I said, yeah. I says, laser is a lot easier to say. You know, so there's it was Meredith was one of my other readers. She just says, your book reads almost like you're giving a lesson on aviation and science, you know, high-tech stuff, and so on and so forth. I said, well, I didn't mean to quite come across like that. I said, but one of the things that I've always been frustrated with in reading other people's work is, you know, they'll tell you something and expect you to know what they're talking about. You know, and I said, you know, how many books have you read like that where they said something and you have no idea what they're talking about and they didn't explain it? It was extremely frustrating. So yeah, I went into a little bit of detail.
So this, even non-aviation people are gonna be able to understand this?
Yeah, I hope so, yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
I'll let you know.
I hope so. Yeah, there was, one of the other things that always, there's always a prologue and epilogue in both of my books, because the prologue kind of like, since they're both historical novels, sets the time frame when the story takes place and gives you a little bit of background about what's going on in the world at that particular point in time. And then the epilogue, again, I read a lot of books where they just end. Okay, you left me hanging. There's too many loose strings here. I want to know what happened, with this and that and that. And that was the reason for the epilogue of both books. What went on after that? What became of this facility? What became of that person? He went to jail.
There's a lot of comeuppance.
Yeah, a lot of people went to jail.
Did you put a map
Yeah.
in your book?
Pardon?
Did you put a map in your book?
There are diagrams and maps. Yeah.
Great.
Diagrams and maps.
I love maps.
I do too.
Because again, I've read a lot of books and they're talking about this. Tom Clancy is great for this. He talks about this maneuver in the Baltic Sea and so on and so forth. So I got to get an atlas and open it up and see what he's talking about. And so that's why I have maps and diagrams, stuff like that. Yeah, it was actually a fun story to write. Once I got into it, it kind of wrote itself. It's just the only hang-up that I had was verifying all the research in St. Charles, working with St. Charles. St. Charles, they have bigger problems than Tom Wangler and BACKSKATTER.
Yeah, they do. We didn't need them.
So.
So what's next, Tom?
One of the this is a great question. One of the comments that was made by one of my readers was that oh, it's really an interesting story, mystery, intrigue, and suspense, and so on. But where's the romance? Where's the sex? I'm saying it's not that kind of a novel.
They didn't have time. They were...
No. So talk to my wife Cheryl. I says, because she's asked me, she's going to write a third one. I says maybe. So I thought maybe I'd write something that has to do with romance or sex or whatever. Throw something like that.
Winter.
Yeah, throw something like that in there. Just to appease a certain segment of my readers.
It's the final in the trilogy.
Yeah. Yeah. I had was toying with the idea of this guy that has a problem. He has a mental illness, and as part of his mental illness, he sees and hears things that really aren't there, and how it affects his life. So I thought that might be kind of a challenge to write something like that, especially when you interject a woman that he meets that really doesn't exist, and how he deals with his lover that's really not there. It's all in his mind. So so I thought that might be kind of fun and interesting to write. Not exactly sure how I'd approach it. I'm sure it will probably offend some people. Hope not. But it's definitely getting away from my genre. Yeah.
They're evolving.
Evolving. Yeah, evolving. So, Glenn, you are on your fourth book?
Fourth nonfiction. Yeah, so we moved away from fiction.
Okay. So we won't be able to call it the Chronicles anymore? We'll have to call it something else?
No, nonfiction.
What's the new one about?
I'm working on 2 books now. I'm working on history of Mount Bachelor
Oh,
and
good.
also a history of search and rescue in Oregon.
Okay.
So I've got 2 things.
Historical books then.
Yeah. Getting actually, that's kind of where I started out as a writer, so I'm getting back to
Okay.
where it is.
Oh, so it's, when you get into it, if you decide to change it into a historical novel.
Yeah. I'll talk to you if I do. Yeah. I'm sure you have some good stories.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I don't, historical novels are fun to write because you can take events and places and people and basically you can
Mess
rewrite
them all
history.
up.
Yeah, yeah, you can bundle them all up and rewrite history, so, yeah.
I think they're really fun to read too.
Yeah, they are. It's alternative history, yeah. So it's, I always go back to thinking about what James Cameron did to Titanic. You know, that's historical
Mhm.
novel, historical movie, you know, built around an actual incident. So, you know, in terms of top secret military projects, who knows? You know, who knows what's going on out there? Who knows? Might write another one, might not.
Every time I finish a book, I swear it's my last. Something happens and I
Do it
start
again?
another one. It's like having babies or something. Although I stopped having babies.
You know, how many authors are you working with now?
We have about 5 projects somewhere in mid-stream right now.
Okay. That's good.
Yeah, it's good. We are pretty much all word of mouth. You know, so we've been doing 8 to 10 a year, I'd say.
All local?
Mostly all Oregon.
Okay.
Because of the word of mouth thing, that's sort of just the way it works out. But I kind of like it that way because I like Oregonians, you know, they're just good people, and I like working with people who come to us through, you know, a friend or such, because a lot of it for us is the relationships, you know, that's the way we like this and what we enjoy take out of it too, is that it is more personal. So I like working with people in the state. We've had a few clients from farther away too.
What a fun business to be in.
It's been a good project. It's nice to, like I said, meet people like you and help people get their work out into the world.
Watched one of my favorite movies is an animated movie by the name of, remember the name of it? No, it's an animated movie. I'm trying to think of it. It'll come to me here in a minute. It's about the Ratatouille. Yeah, Ratatouille. That was a great movie, you know, because that whole theme of that movie was, you know, anybody could cook. Anybody can cook, you know. And when I talk to people about my work, and they says, "Oh, God, I wish I could do something like that." I said, "You can." I said, "All it takes is time. You know, it takes time. It takes an idea at a time. It's just something that you got to work at. But anybody can write a book." Glenn writes faster than I do because he writes smarter than I do. What he does is, you know, because people say, "Well, how do you keep track of your timeline? How do you keep track of this? How do you keep track of that?" So I said, "Well, as I do it, I write it down in a book, you know, so I can refer back to it." Glenn has this wonderful spreadsheet system that he uses. So whenever he writes a chapter or a portion of a chapter, he makes an entry into the spreadsheet so that everything flows the way that it's supposed to.
I thought I was being original with that, and I read something the other day saying that more than like half of authors use Excel as
Oh,
part of
really?
their writing process. Yeah.
It's just like a project management
Yeah,
system.
apparently. Yeah, I thought it was being really clever, but apparently a lot of people are doing this. It's very common.
My guess is
Yeah,
that it's
exactly.
come from NaNoWriMo.
Oh, really?
From National
Oh,
Novel
maybe
Writing
you're right.
Month,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
the people that put that on also put out a book called No Plot, No Problem,
Oh,
where they
okay.
kind of started classifying people as pantsers or plotsers. So plotsers, you make the plot, and
Yeah.
pantsers, you write by the seat of your pants.
Yeah.
Which is what I am. But speaking of, we're going to do some NaNoWriMo stuff in November, so if anybody's interested in that. But I think that that's gotten people a lot more, or using like Trello cards and that
Right,
kind of
right,
stuff,
yeah.
gotten people a lot more into the technology of, because I had a professor at PSU who, she just did it by 3x5 cards.
Yeah.
And then she would move them on a big whiteboard if she felt the need.
That's old-fashioned
That's,
spreadsheet.
but, right, but that's
Yeah,
an
it's
old-fashioned
the same.
spreadsheet. I
Yeah.
mean, that, yeah, it works.
That's probably why it took me 26 months. I didn't do that. I was on by the seat of my pants.
Yeah. Some of the best, I mean, I still think some of the best ones are pantsers. You just
Yeah.
never know. So,
Everyone knows that.
yeah, yeah.
I've only written one fiction book and it was definitely pantsered, but then I had to cut a third of it. You know, I had to edit it like crazy because I didn't swerving.
Yeah.
I had to go back and make a lot of changes. But I developed a technique that I just pretended that I was watching it as a movie. Okay. So there's one character, almost all of my readers ask the same question. Who was Major Jefferson based upon? He was basically the hero of the book. He was the one that solved everything. Solved everything, kept everybody on track. I mean, the guy was he was a hard worker. He was ethical. He was always looking out for his partner, and everybody just wondered, who is he based on? Who is he based on? Major Jefferson was based upon the character that Denzel Washington played in The Equalizer. So people said, well, if it ever gets made into a movie, who do you want to see play Jefferson? I said, Denzel Washington. That's all there was to it. There was also somebody mentioned something to me about your description of your characters was really very good, but you didn't say anything about their ethnicity. And I said, well, I did that on purpose. I says, so you can imagine who these people were. You know, was he Native American? Was he African American? Was he Asian American? You know, was he a good guy, a bad guy, a low life? You know, whatever. You know, it's just, you know, leave it. The story will develop certain aspects as you read. Will develop in your mind who these people are. Because Cheryl and I were watching this movie called Meet Joe Black. Joe Black, this guy that becomes Death or whatever it is. He's played by who? Brad Pitt, that's right. And in the movie Meet Joe Black, there's this one character. He's just a weasel. I mean, he's just sneaky. He's just a weasel and so forth. And we just started calling him Webster, you know, because he's Webster. Captain Webster is one of the characters in the book. You know, so you can relate my characters to probably a lot of people that you've met in your life or that you know, like my old boss. Any other questions? It was fun. It was fun to write it. And now I'm kind of depressed because it's done. You know, and it's published.
That's how you end up doing another
and
one.
it's in print. You know,
More landscaping.
You know, just saying. You know, what? You know, do I do a sequel? You know, like you call it Top Gun Jefferson or what? You know. You know, what am I going to do next? Well, thank you again, all, for coming. Yeah, thank you, Julie, for hosting this.
Yeah. Thank you both for being here. So yeah, I'll just remind everybody that we have copies of both of Tom's books for sale. We also have copies of Kim's books back here. If you want to grab one and have it signed and then come to the register, it's up to you, but we'll be over here to check you out. And again, if you're interested in any of our other events, that top shelf right there is all about them. Actually, one that I didn't mention because it's off-site, but 2 Sundays from now, we're going to have Ken Babbs, who is part of the Ken Kesey experience, the Mary, what are they called?
Pranksters.
Mary Pranksters. He wrote a book called Cronies, and we're going to have him over at Worthy Brewing on the 18th. So he's going to be there to sign those books. So if that's older than me, but if you remember that and want to hear fun stories, he's going to be at Worthy to talk about his new book and that fun time they had on that bus. So yeah, thank you everybody for being here tonight, braving the smoke and everything else. Yeah.